games can be hard, right? That one difficulty spike which you throw yourself against over and over? Or those games that revel in their psychoscape of oppression and seemingly impossible odds? Whatever mask it wears, difficulty is here to stay, but difficulty alone does not a great game make. That's right, it's time for a difficulty debate. So we're here again. Assassin's Creed Origins announces a Discovery Tour mode, Cuphead gets released, and all of a sudden the difficulty debate has had its fires re-stoked. Let's put aside for a minute that Discovery Tour mode is in actuality a means to provide a series of guided tours in Ubisoft's recreation of ancient Egypt, and settle down to have a look at the whole difficulty debacle. As with most things, there are a whole raft of arguments for and against the accused. Often the original meanings and spirit of certain arguments are misrepresented and spat back in the face of the other side, with it rapidly descending into a shouting match with the words "entitled" or "elitist" occasionally audible against the background din. Of course, it's usually impossible to be impartial and not to take sides in a thing like this, but I'm going to attempt to put forward my argument in a reasonable way, and if you want to disagree, fine. That's great, in fact. I'd love to hear your opinion. It's just I'd rather get a reasonable critique or opposing point rather than an all caps angry message. Okay? Well, let's get on to the meat and bones of it then, shall we? First off, boiling down a range of diverse views into two reductive, diametrically opposed opinions is a tricky operation indeed, with accusations of straw manning often heard on the breeze and in internet comments, and to these worries, I have this to say. Yes, a point might get overlooked. A central tenet of the accessibility or challenge faith may be misinterpreted, but I will try my utmost to get a sampling of the general points of both sides and put them forth as clearly as I can. So first up we have the challenge crowd. The core of this particular faith is that in certain video games at least, challenge forms an integral part of that experience. The game's developers have designed the pacing of the game, tweaking and fine-tuning it in such a way that it's balanced, adhering to the rules of the theory of flow. Now, the concept of flow comes from the psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. I have butchered your name there, my deepest apologies. And Mihaly basically argued that people are happiest when they exist in a state of flow, when a task maintains that perfect balance between challenge and abilities, when people become absorbed and get into the zone. Anywho, the idea goes that if you make something too easy, there's boredom, the person apathetic to the dull challenges placed before them. Make something too hard on the other hand, and the person becomes anxious, stressed out as they come up against obstacles well beyond their abilities. Skilled game developers are therefore master engineers of flow, people who tread that knife edge, constantly pushing a player just beyond their comfort level, keeping them engaged and still having a good time. In practice, this can be done in many ways. A common method is to drip feed a progression of abilities throughout the game, requiring you to constantly re-evaluate your toolbox and adapt to the new situations you're confronted with. A game that pulls this off with aplomb is the reboot of Devil May Cry. In this particular case, weapons and abilities are unlocked throughout the story, with new enemy types regularly popping up to say hello. This progression serves to both expand your sadistic skill set and to remix your approach to combat encounters. Coupled with the style system, which rewards you for variety, doling out more points if you make full use of your arsenal of abilities, leads to a feeling of constant challenge and rising stakes. You are incentivized to try out these new tricks and combos. The game actively encourages you to adapt and think on your feet. For the challenge crowd, this is paramount in the enjoyment of certain types of game, this building sense of challenge and progression. Strip this experience out or alter it in some way and you lose something. You deviate from the developer's vision, the flow that they meticulously defined comes crumbling down as the game becomes trivial to a fault. Or, at least, so the argument goes. The allies of accessibility, on the other hand, argue that there are different flow curves for different people. It's not that they can't enjoy a game because they haven't gotten good? Who knows. It's just that they have a different level of ability. Simply put, what others found to be a fine balance of challenge pushing them ever onwards will simply be impenetrable to others, be that right from the get-go or just at a particular difficulty spike along the way. The accessibilists argue that a person could enjoy the game if only some of the cogs that drive the flow were tweaked a little for them. So far, so not particularly groundbreaking. After all, difficulty options have been around for years, allowing players some degree of control over the challenge presented to them. Sure, there's probably a designed difficulty option which the game is built around as its default, dare I say, intended way to play, but other options exist which don't seriously detract from the experience, catering to players who want minimal combat to those who can only really be described as masochistic. There is the argument that these difficulty options are usually rather inorganically placed at the beginning of the game, asking you to make an assessment of your skill level before you've even had a chance to play. There's something wrong here. But what could it be? Anyway, this setup could conceivably lead to you picking an option unsuited to your skill, leaving you either bored to tears or just crying because the big demon keeps killing you and why won't it stop? The solution lies in either offering a difficulty select at the end of the tutorial or to offer some sort of in-game difficulty tuning a la the easy mode of Dark Souls, where you cheese the AI by using spells and ranged attacks. There's even the adaptive difficulty of games like Resident Evil 4 or Left 4 Dead, which both take stock of your skill in-game, adjusting variables behind the scene accordingly. This can be seen as a sort of adaptive flow implementation where a game constantly shifts in order to keep you on your personal balance between challenge and ability. Another idea floated by the accessibilists has been a form of skip button, or maybe a simple chapter select. The argument goes that bosses and difficulty spikes serve as barred gates to the rest of the game. Just can't get a handle on the attack patterns of a particular boss? Well, I guess you'll never be seeing that shiny kingdom on the other side of the arena now, will you? It's super awesome. They have jelly and chocolate. It's better than it sounds, I promise. The argument against skip buttons usually begins with questions about the mechanics of its implementation into a specific game, making the point that everything is in the game for a reason, and if you skip it you might get lost or not understand something integral to the plot, or a whole cavalcade of other reasons. However, this misses the more general point that this specific solution is making. That being that there should be some option to bypass sections that are found challenging, whether that option be in the form of a literal big red skip button, or in the form of God mode, or something else entirely. The thrust behind the argument being that we shouldn't gate off part of the experience behind a challenging section just because we can. Back in the other court, the argument goes that if developers decide to create additional difficulty modes or skip buttons or whatever the implementation, there will be a consequent time and money drain on the resources for the main development of the game. If devs have to constantly be tweaking what are essentially multiple versions of their game, then the base, intended experience will suffer. They'll be spread too thinly to ensure that the game can be as good as it can be, and instead they'll be focused on making sure that it's accessible to all. Sort of tied into this is the argument that developers should be able to make the games they want to make. They shouldn't feel obligated to add in difficulty options if it doesn't fit their vision. These kinds of options should be the choice of the developer, not some mandate from on high. Personally, I don't see this ever being the case. There isn't a higher gaming authority who dictates what people can and can't put in their games apart from, actual laws and stuff. And this idea that the amorphous blob called the games industry would submit to implementing difficulty settings across the board in the pursuit of mass appeal it's an odd one, since they would surely have already done that if they thought it was a winning strategy. Anyway, I'm pretty firmly in the camp that believes that it's the developer's choice whether or not they can or should add in difficulty options. It's up to them whether they think that that will divert resource or detract from their game in some way. Saying that, I do have a semi-response to the time and money argument. See, there's this cheat that used to be around in quite a few games. God mode? In any game that relies on HP or lives or the such like, a God mode of some description would be relatively easy to implement. After all, the groundwork's there, it's just cranking a number a little bit behind the scenes is all. Anyone playing then still gets to completely experience the game without the risk of missing content associated with the boss skip or level select method. Then, when a player gets hung up on a section, or even from the start, they can just punch in the code. Sure, it's not quite the same experience as finishing a fight just by the skin of your teeth, but it's something, and, importantly, it doesn't detract from the designed experience for anyone that wants to play without it. Well, unless you subscribe to the argument that game designers will get lazy as a result of God mode, just leaving in unbalanced sections since they know players can effectively skip it. Thankfully, for the sake of brevity, I'll dismiss this as a bit of a stretch down the old slippery slope, and oh god, they let me near the metaphors again, didn't they? Anyway, so God mode could act as a dirty and quick fix for some games. Of course, this method doesn't work for everything. Platformers would have to brick up their death chasms, and any game that doesn't have HP or lives, like racing or puzzle games, would need a fundamental rethink. But as a quick fix for some games, I don't think it would be too resource heavy for developers to add in. Hell, modders have been adding it in with cheat engines and trainers for years. Up to this point, I've missed out an important point, but I think it's one I'd like to make here as we gently meander towards the end. Challenge and flow are fine and dandy as a means of measuring the joyful experience that is playing games, but they're hardly the only metric. Sure, arcade games like Super Hexagon are essentially pure flow type games, but for a lot of others, challenge is not the sole quality they offer, and some don't even really offer challenge at all. Take Dark Souls. Hidetaka Miyazaki himself has said that he wanted to instill in the player a feeling of accomplishment, of overcoming tremendous odds. And yeah, I think he achieved that. But it's not the only thing the game does well. Both the world design and story behind Dark Souls are fascinating to me. The paths and journeys that fall back on themselves with the game bleeding history from every moss-filled corner. And it's not just me that enjoys this aspect. There's the whole Souls lore community which sprung up around the series. People like VatiVidya and his viewers, people who pull together all the story threads and fill in the gaps. I've seen this point countered with, why don't you watch a Let's Play if you don't want to play the game? And my response is this. Wandering the world and immersing yourself in it is the game. Just enjoying the fights and largely ignoring lore is the game. They're not incompatible things. Different people can enjoy the same thing for different reasons, and if one person wants a mode where they can not worry about dying, and another wants one that's just a boss rush, and a third wants one where they can do both, who am I to say that they can't? If the possibility exists, then why not let it flourish?